new solder along with the original. Go ahead and retouch the first one I've done. One reason I'm doing this is because the original solder is very hard to remove with a solder sucker. Different batches may be different, but that's the first row. Also add a little bit more solder than they would have, because the more solder you use, the less chance that it's able to crack. If you think about it, it makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and solder those. This is preventive maintenance. These aren't cracked, but as old as these original solder joints are, it wouldn't surprise me if they would crack not too long from now. Warm up the whole entire bubble of solder, add a little bit more. You want a nice shiny bubble of solder. Just like that. And here we're going to solder the potentiometer. Oops, my hand's in the way, I'm sorry about that. You want to do one leg at a time, because if you do more than one, the solder is not only responsible for making a good electrical contact, it's also responsible for holding it in. And it can shift the part, and when you place the item back together, it won't go back together correctly. Now these right here, because it's connected metallically to the rest of the potentiometer housing, this requires a lot more heat. So I'm going to let that sit for a second like that. These are especially known for cracking. Hopefully you can see that. And do the other one. Apply a little bit of solder to get a little bit better thermal contact. Smaller parts like the legs, like right here, these pieces right here, are easier to solder quickly because they're smaller and well, never mind. It just takes it doesn't take as long to heat up the whole entire part. As you see, there's quite a bit of difference in the time to solder the big pieces like these big support brackets. And I'm going to go ahead and get another view. Go ahead and warm it up. Apply the new solder, make sure it hits both sides. I view these as two sides, one side and the other side. I don't know if you can see me moving that there. If you're wondering what kind of solder I use, it's expensive, but I use Kester solder. Very good stuff. I don't use the Radio Shack stuff because they tend to overcharge on absolutely everything that they sell. And I think it's ridiculous, the prices. And the quality of the Kester solder is a little bit better. Although, it really doesn't matter what brand of solder you use. I usually try to go for the best that I can get within my budget. Which isn't much. I don't have much of a budget on anything, really. I don't like to cheapen out on things. Because I'm always going to think, what if those cheap components go out? Or what if that cheap solder cracks? So, just go ahead and get the good stuff first and do it right the first time. I'll also visually inspect all these solder joints, make sure they haven't cracked. And I'll find anything else that might have stress marks or cracks on it, like the switches that and the potentiometers might. I finished resoldering all the parts that would have been stressed, like the 2 potentiometers on both sides, or I should say 1 on each side, and the 3 switches. And I further looked at these capacitors. I don't think they're bad. I'm still debating whether I want to replace them. And I don't have too much experience with these. I don't know how much they glitch like they did, but I knew there was a big bright white line across the screen, and it was like that, make that kind of noise out of the speaker. It was completely. It wasn't supposed to do that. I noticed. That's all I know about it. So I don't think it'll do it again, but you know, who knows really. So here's board. Go ahead and leave the originals in there. It's not too hard to take this back out and replace the caps. If you want, you can replace them. These are 85 degrees Celsius caps. I usually replace them with 105s just to be safe. And replace them with exactly 470 microfarad capacitors. Don't put any 560s or 330s in there. Go with straight 470s at 85 degrees Celsius or 105, and make sure they're 16 volts or higher. Let's go ahead and reassemble this board back into the Odyssey's case, and we'll start by getting the case. So I'm going to go ahead and gently lift the board out of the way. Set the case down. And this board sits in here kind of odd, or what goes in a little bit differently. I do notice that this coil has to go, coiled of wire here has to go a certain way. Gotta be really careful not to move any components out of the original way they were setting. Go ahead and just line up the shafts of the controls with the holes. Being very gentle. If it doesn't want to go, don't force it. Figure out a way to get it to go. So let me go ahead and sitting kind of funny here. Let me go ahead and get the board in. I figured out that this video output cable was stuck around this metal piece right here. So you want to move it so it sits over here. That's what was causing it to not want the board to not sit down correctly. So go ahead and the screw that holds this back board on for the power supply is colored differently. It's a bronze color. It's a quarter inch.
Uh-oh, he's got his own ship. He needs a girl. Oh, wait, he's just the bottom.
This is Kent Brockman at the site of the so-called Springfield Miracle.
When installing the board, you want to make sure that there's a little screw right here. Comes out of that metal box. You want to make sure that that doesn't get trapped beneath the edge of the battery box. I just had that problem, and once everything's good, you can see that everything wants to line up perfectly. Go ahead and set this up a little bit. Move it around a little bit. Make sure all three switches. We'll have them move these pieces of plastic right here. Let me zoom in real quick. There's a little piece of plastic right here. I'm gonna make sure the switch goes through that. I'm having trouble right there. We go. See up here? See right here? It passed through. Go ahead and get that to. It's kind of hard to do. There's little dust filters right there. This is what you want for the switches to pass through the plastic, but still able to be oriented in different ways or moved. Go ahead and start inserting the screws. I don't tighten them up until I have them all in there. I just tighten them up to where it's about 1/8 of an inch from touching the board to where it's loose somewhat, to make sure that the board wants to sit that way. If I'm getting some kind of resistance from the board, if it wants to move or a different way, then I'm going to take the board back out and make sure I don't put too much stress on it and crack it. Got the board in. Now's the time to attach the knobs. You want to give some finger pressure right here below the knob to prevent too much pressure on the board. Brand new almost feeling. Same with the other side. Just want to be careful not to cut yourself on the very sharp legs on the bottom of the board. I know I've done that plenty of times. Just gotta be really careful. Another thing I do before I put the thing completely back together, make sure the switches move without too much pressure. You want to make sure to reconnect the battery. And just to be safe, you want to make sure that the unit is turned off before you put the batteries in. I'm going to go ahead and insert the 3 or 6 C-Saws alkaline batteries. Sounds like the kids are in trouble again upstairs. Tell me something new. They're kids. They get in trouble just like I used to. Except I took stuff apart. Now we should get a tone. Sorry for the kid crying upstairs. They like to get in trouble. You see the little speaker right there is doing its job just fine. Well, it's obviously working, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn it off. And we'll hook it up to the television. What you do to hook this up, it's kind of an odd setup the way we've had it. Of course, Simple, just hook this up to the game cord. Nothing, nothing too bad about that. Put it in game mode. And what we have to do is, because the TV that I have here is not VHF with a 2-screw input, I'm going to use two nuts to attach this to this. Just like this. As you can see, it's pretty simple. Now we're going to go ahead and turn on the TV, turn on the Odyssey. See, now it's doing the same thing it did before. Go ahead and turn it back. There it goes. So I think I am going to go ahead and replace those caps. Let's see how the other one performs. Aha! Okay, it's a little scratchy still. Okay, this is the one that was dirty before. Here's the one that's good. So, this is a success. I've also noticed resoldering some of the components. I also resoldered a whole bunch of others. This side has reappeared. I've noticed that when I first turned this on, the side was faded out a little bit and a little crooked. Still is a little crooked. I think it's my TV's fault. This thing's about to die. It's a trash find anyways, so it doesn't matter. The unit's working. Let's see if I can play with one hand. I don't know how this... I'm not doing it very well. Dang it. Son of a gun. Okay, it must be the other control. I'm just sucking right now. Wait. Ah! Even though I can't play at all, I need to learn, but nice clean transition from game to game. No noise in the... Okay, there you go. That must be normal, I guess. I don't know. Just disappears. Still a bit of noise in the control. As you see, it flickers a little bit. So I'm going to continue to work that back and forth. And should improve. But that is how I repaired this unit. See if I can get it. Ah, son of a gun. Okay, got it. Man, I suck at this. Which one is it? I can't do it. New solder along with the original. Go ahead and retouch the first one I've done. One reason I'm doing this is because the original solder is very hard to remove with a solder sucker. Different batches may be different, but the solder is not only responsible for making a good electrical contact, it's also responsible for holding it in. And it can shift the part, and when you place the item back together, it won't go back together correctly. Now these right here, because it's connected metallically to the rest of the potentiometer housing, this requires a lot more heat. So I'm going to let that sit for a second like that. Just like that. And here we're going to solder the potentiometer. Oops, my hand's in the way. I'm sorry about that. You want to do one leg at a time, because if you do more than one, that's the first row. Also add a little bit more solder than they would have, because the more solder you use, the less chance that it's able to crack. think about it, it makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and solder those. This is preventive maintenance. These aren't cracked, but as old as these original solder joints are, it wouldn't surprise me if they would crack not too long from now. So warm up the whole entire bubble of solder, add a little bit more. You want a nice shiny bubble of solder.